Hey gang, we haven't done a wild speculation in a while, and this topic is going to impact so many things in this game. When it's finalized, the 1.0 version of medical gameplay will hopefully be as in-depth as the mining loop is right now. What all will be in it? Well, let's get this. So first off, I'm going to break this into two, let's call it three parts. First up, I want to talk about the line item that CIG carved out for this in the past, because it gives us some clues as to what might be coming, as well as the latest event, a line of mine, and how it hints at some of those medical changes that might be in the works and maybe even the near future. Second, there's a pretty good chance the Apollo is dropping relatively soon, and it'll be the largest pure medical ship we'll have in the game so far, and it should be coming with some new mechanics, and we'll talk about that too. Third, we're going to jump into the meat of this and go into blue sky territory where I blab about what I think would be cool for medical gameplay, just moving into the future. Starting off, CIG is spending this year, or at least the foreseeable future, focusing on stability more than mechanics. Even from early patches in this year, it's clear this doesn't mean we're not getting anything new, just that, unlike past years, that new stuff won't be the focus, and rather they'll be focusing on stabilizing the stuff that's already in the game, like server meshing. That said, does that mean that I expect that everything I'm about to talk about, or some version of it, is going to be dropping into the game in the next few months, or maybe even this year? Nope. Maybe a year off, maybe more, maybe we get pieces, maybe we get the whole thing, who knows? Really, like most of my wild speculation vids, this is just a fun think piece where we can have a conversation, you and me, about what we want, and maybe CIG has some of those thoughts in their head too. Or maybe we can influence them if this thing blows up, which it won't because this is a tiny shell. But anyway, cool. Let's get rolling. Back when I used to do sprint watches focused on the progress tracker, this was one of my most popular deliverables to pick out. I did it almost every single time I did a sprint watch. I'll just read this out so that you can get why I zeroed in on it and why I'm calling it out now for this particular wild speculation. Actor Status Tier 2 looks at a variety of new elements such as hygiene, NPC status tracking, multiple bytes, which who the hell knows what that is, DNA integrity, medical insurance, cybernetic limbs, and cloning. So there's a lot packed into that sense, and some of it probably deserves its own show one day. So I'm taking a note of that. The whole hygiene thing, for example, is going to change the way most players play the game, just like eating and drinking do now. But this is about the next tier of medical, so we'll skip hygiene for now, like we all do every morning, right? And look at the second half of that deliverable. DNA integrity, medical insurance, cybernetic limbs, and cloning. Let's start at kind of a weird place and jump right into a line of mine, the event that's going on right now. In case you missed the intro vid for this event or the background behind it when CIG was going over it, the idea is that regeneration is failing, and the scientists that made it aren't completely sure why. So they're doing more research with exotic elements like copion horns and these various minables to try to figure out what's going on. Regeneration is Star Citizen's in-game answer and explanation for respawning. For that, they could have just had their original write-up and left it at that. All they really needed to do, and even saying needed is a bit strong, is to just explain why it is my character could get ganked over here, but then be able to poof over to a hospital over here and be just fine and back at a 100% health. So far as that goes, this whole event is pretty cool. CIG is actually weaving in actual world building, which is more of a release game thing to do rather than an alpha build thing to do. So that's pretty cool and kind of a good sign for where CIG is kind of angling their focus right now. But it seems like there's something deeper going on with this event, at least in its narrative. What I think this is, other than just an excuse to recapture the magic of Jumptown's wholesale PvP slaughterfest, and yeah, I'm talking about the original here, not the line simulator they eventually turned it into. But anyway, I think it's to lay some groundwork for the mechanics that'll be coming down the pike. Basically, what we're seeing is that regeneration has some complications, that maybe it isn't the panacea that was promised. Again, in-game lore. So maybe the portent here is that, while full, endless regeneration might be possible for the Vandal. Maybe we humans need a slightly lesser version, one that comes with costs and limitations. And that's why the DNA integrity, cybernetic limbs, and cloning will matter. Medical insurance will probably play a role as well, but for this chat, it's a less important aspect of what I'm trying to get. Maybe we'll get to that in a later vid too. So again, me taking notes on later vids to make. Anyways, if the regen thing is working perfectly, as it has so far in this game, then there'd be no need for cybernetic limbs. Of course, those of you who have been around for a while know that the idea of death of a spaceman is that all our tunes have a mysterious number of times that we can be rezzed before it doesn't work anymore. And if you suffer particularly egregious injuries during that time, those injuries will carry over into your new body. So example, if you lose your arm before you're ganked or somebody blows your arm off, which, side note here, it would be awesome if they started putting those injuries actually in there, where if you got your leg blown up, it actually blew off your leg. Boom. Cybernetic arm when you wake up on the far side. Or a hook, I guess, if you're somewhere shady and low tech. Looking at you, Pyro. We don't need to get into depths behind this mechanic, but basically your clone is carrying over the trauma the prior iteration had. So the arm might have worked just fine, but your mind is cutting it off and now it doesn't work in the new body or something like that. Basically, it's just the first thing I said. The more copies you have made, the less legible the new copy will be. So multiplicity style, in other words. So that's the idea. Since this is something we captured from the Vandal, there are things we don't understand about the technology. And real quick, before we move on to the next part, I noticed a couple other things from the trailer. This carry animation, for example, that's something that we need. Yeah, even in a game with so many beams, we need a physical way to move bodies or injured people without a tractor beam. Hopefully that's a signifier of something that we're actually getting and not just some animation that they baked in for the new trailer alone. Also, I feel like this is a missed opportunity right here. So much of this style of game, especially in an MMO, is telling a story in the environment. Could you imagine if you respawned at Mary Pure of Heart in Lorville and there were body bags everywhere? Or if you started to spawn back in and instead of seeing the usual scene of the screen moving out of the way as you hop out of the bed, you hear a doctor saying, "Damn it, we're losing them, we're losing them." And then the screen goes black. Maybe not every time, but randomly every 10 or so. Yeah, that would have driven the narrative that they're trying to create with this event home a bit harder. And it might have hit a bit harder. Maybe hit a bit harder than, say, a murder hobo just blowing up every ship on the pad because reasons. Maybe. This will be a little shorter as it's really just a ship. And yeah, I know this game is driven on just a ship. Everybody has ship or ships or way too many ships like me. The Apollo is a cool ship. Yeah. And it'll probably be the best medical ship we'll have to this point. It almost certainly will be, since it was originally supposed to be the bridge between the Cuddy Red and the Endeavour Hope, which is a capital sized, basically flying hospital. While other ships have got tier 1 medical beds like the Carrack and the Polaris, the Apollo is a dedicated medical ship. More than that, it's supposed to come with a medical drone. Now, we know that construction will be coming with drones, and that's the basis for the whole construction loop. So we're not getting any aspect of the construction loop until we get drones. So a medical drone being in the cards isn't exactly beyond the pale. Would they drop the Apollo without a medical drone? I mean, maybe, but I don't think so. I think last year's SitCon showed that CIG is aware that the clock is ticking on the project. And there are some things like drone play that have been languishing in the wings for years. Drones are something that's used in pretty much every single game loop in this game. So better CIG tackles it sooner than later, I think. I used to argue that a camera drone would be the way to go for a first drone in the game because it's literally just a flying eyeball, but medical would probably be a close second as it's also non-combat. It doesn't really need to do anything other than pick a body up and carry it to the ship. I guess there's some manipulation with a tractor beam or something, but not much. So I'll throw this out there in prediction territory. If we do get the CSV SM, I think it's the SM, whatever the builder version is, or whatever horrific alphabet soup they came up with for it. The builder one, the one with the 2 drones, likely a good sign that the Apollo is going to come with its drone too. So there, I said it, prediction territory. Usually don't do that, so enjoy it while it lasts, and definitely burn me alive when it turns out to not be true. So now we're in solid conjecture territory. For those of you who haven't seen my wild speculations before, these are meant to be more of a conversation starter and wouldn't it be cool if show. So if that's cool, let's get into it. So I'm going to start in a place that might seem a little bit weird. Like I said, wild speculation. Okay, so with vehicles and probably buildings when we're eventually building them, we're going to move away from hard and soft deaths and toward a system of damaging components and relays that cause that ship to shut down. So just a big overview and oversimplified, ships will gradually move from a big object with a set number of hit points and then almost a random dice roll on whether it hard or soft deaths to something that's more like an actual vehicle in real life. In other words, you'll be trying to disable a ship by taking out specific components and relays on that ship, as opposed to simply reducing its hit point pool to 0. Ships have major systems that control the life of the ship. Power shields, weapons, and eventually, one day, life support, gravity, you get the idea. Knocking out a ship will probably be more about hitting a ship in the right spots, specific spots to knock out systems than just hitting the ship in general, like to blow off a wing or to blow off an engine or something like that. You're trying to hit specific components. Of course, I imagine if you hit the ship's surface enough times, even if you aren't hitting major components, it's still going to get to the point where it just falls apart, right? And on that segue, let's get into people. Actually, wait, no. First, let's take a very short step back and talk about the original death of a spaceman, because it does have relevance here. So in the early days of this project, when Tessa Bannisters roamed the verse, the idea was loosely that medical technology was good enough in the far-flung future that your body could be recovered and brought back, even if you had suffered catastrophic damage. This idea fit with the physicalized, okay, maybe not realistic, but grounded idea of the game. You had one body. It would break down over time, and eventually that body would take so much cumulative damage that it couldn't be repaired. So this made a lot of sense with the whole artificial limbs they showed off a few years back. If your body is getting beat to hell, yeah, you're going to lose some stuff eventually. You're going to require spectacular tech to bring you back to life. But this system was also obviously problematic for an MMO. Just a few problems off the top of my head is respawn time. Like how long would your character be down? How would you recover your own body? Would you take over an NPC? Would the NPC revert once your body was recovered? Would you have to pay someone else to get your body before you could log back in the game? And what if they couldn't recover it? What if someone was holding your body and you couldn't get it back? You get the idea. This original idea had some problems, so they eventually circled around to just respawning, but with a twist so they could keep some of those original elements. And that brings us to regeneration. Regeneration has its problems too, but if we want our MMO, it creates fewer problems than the original Death of a Spaceman idea did, where you would just have one single body, even if it did it with more hand-wavium and space magic. Anyways, now they've accounted for that damage carrying over from one body to the next in kind of a, for lack of a better term, quantum entanglement. Your brain remembers the trauma and it transfers it to the new body. So if you get an arm blown off, oops, arm on the clone body won't work and now you'll need a replacement. So yeah, hand wavium, but it does open the door for the medical gameplay to actually mean something. And that's kind of the rub. How will the medical game loop ramp up from where it is right now? What's the incentive for a player to sit tight or heal up rather than just hit the respawn button? Yeah, there's the inconvenience of being transferred from wherever you were dropped to wherever your spawn point is. But if you're about to be dropped and you actually are dropped, why would you sit around and wait for some medic to come grab you and heal you up when you can just take the backspace express? And further on that point, nowadays, almost no one does medical beacons because, one, I don't think they're working in this patch, but two, people will use them as honeypots. Both people will pretend to be injured to draw a person in and steal their stuff, or a person will take a medical beacon and steal the stuff of the down person. So we're still not sure how CIG is going to solve this problem. I'm not even sure CIG has figured that one out yet either, although I'm sure they're working on something. I mean, yeah, we'll have the hidden limit to the number of times you can respawn, and that'll be something of a deterrent. And the current Align and Mine event seems to suggest that humanity's grasp of what seems to be Vandal tech might not be as deep as everyone in the verse thought, as I said earlier. But beyond that, what could CIG do to make the actual medical loop itself interesting, and interesting both for the patient and the doctor, so that people actually want to engage with it? For the replacement parts, they could have them inferior to the original. So mechanical arms aren't quite as staple as your original ones. Mechanical legs don't allow you to move as fast or jump as high, that sort of thing, even though it's kind of counterintuitive to how things work in reality and other cyberpunk and cyberware kind of games. I'm just not sure how else CIG could game it so people would actually want to stick with their bodies. The one thing I can think of is it's possible they'll hook it into that soft attribute system they've been talking about the last couple of years. So an example of this attribute system is, let's say that you carry a bunch of heavy boxes around because you're a cargo mover. Eventually, your character will kind of build up strength to carry heavier things more efficiently than somebody who doesn't actually do that. Or if you pull a lot of Gs in space combat or dogfighting, you'll eventually be able to pull more than the average player. Again, a player that doesn't take part in that kind of combat. So maybe you lose those attributes when you regen. Or maybe regen has another random failure rate, not just for death, but for injuries too. If you had the chance to lose an arm or leg on regen, even without having actually sustained such an injury going in, it would make regen a bit more risky than it is now. You'd truly be rolling the dice. Additionally, there might be an issue with the quality of the gear. So regenning in Maria Pure of Heart or well-run Endeavor Hope, for example, would have better results than regenerating in, say, Obituary Station. Of course, there's also insurance to consider. So if you're constantly dying in combat or you're a known pirate, there's a chance that your insurance might only cover inferior regen or not at all. And your actual death of a spaceman number might come up much sooner than if you're, say, space trucker who sticks to the safe trade lanes. And it would make sense that if you're on the lawful side or have a very high rep with the council, that you might have access to better regen and replacement parts. So let's get into those replacement parts. And I'm talking about more than just cyber limbs here. And yeah, this is where the speculation part goes from pretty safe to from things that they've kind of hinted at to wild, which is just purely out of my brain. So buckle up. This all assumes that people will be incentivized to keep their bodies, their original bodies, rather than engaging in the Backspace Express. How CIG eventually pulls that off is anyone's guess, but here's my guesses on what CIG could do to make the higher tiers of the medical loop interesting for the people who engage in it. There was a reason why I had the bit about how ships will work once engineering is in, as a frame built around a series of systems that make up what the ship can do. Simplistically, the human body is the same way. It's a shell built around a skeletal system and protecting various organs that perform functions to sustain the life of the person. Largely, these systems are grouped together by us into similar functions. We can throw some analogies at the nervous system, the cardiovascular system, the respiratory system. Actually, 3's probably good enough for this idea, especially those 3. There's no reason to go crazy and have the integumentary system, if I got that name right. I mean, right? Yeah, anyways, where was I? Right, 3 systems to kind of govern the body. So you have the nervous system where the primary organ is, of course, the brain. But you could think of other locations like nerve endings and muscles as kind of being the relays for it. And that might impact what you see or feel, at least in game terms. Cardiovascular obviously has the heart as the primary organ, and respiratory system would have the lungs. Now there are effective components that drive your toon's body, ones that would have to be repaired or replaced if they are sufficiently damaged. And if I'm going to lose months of building up my toon's stamina, if I take the Backspace Express, it might be worth it just to go under the knife or wait for that rescue to arrive. I figure that actual surgery has to be the goal of tier 1 injuries, right? I figure it has to be more complicated than, say, a big purple beam versus a medium blue beam, but yeah, fingers crossed that's actually more technical than that. So let's assume that it is, that instead of getting a beam that just ups your hit points up to your maximum pool, now you have a specialized beam that actually cuts. Of course, the possibilities of exploits there are pretty high, but let's skip that for now. Say it has to be a safety on it, and you have to scan or analyze the damage that has to be present first, or it just has an extremely limited range, but no idea, something like that. CIG can figure out the balance later. But now you have a person that has to be at that medical bed scanner, see the damage on the patient, correctly diagnose it, and then you have to perform precise cuts or hit it with beams, I guess, in precisely the right place and power level, all while administering the correct drugs at the correct time. So that should actually start to sound a little bit like mining and the refining aspect of the game, which is kind of on purpose. So you could be a hair more creative than that, but that's where my brain is going. Somewhere between the old board game operation, but using your own knowledge of what's going on in the game, and then the skill to turn that knowledge into results. So taken that way, if you look at mining, that's how they've done it there. You can know a rock will be hard to break based on what it is, its resistance profile and that sort of thing. And you can have the correct laser on your mining vehicle. But if you haven't been practicing breaking rocks over and over and over again, that thing's probably going to explode on you, even though you had all the information and the right tools. The downside with surgery is that the thing that'll explode will be a person. And exploding a bunch of people will probably mean that your rep as a doctor will crash through the floor, and you will crash into Klesher. And one day, rep will matter, as will Klesher probably. But back to those major systems. Now you can disable a person in the same way you could disable a ship. Hit the lungs and they won't be able to breathe or move as quickly. Hit their legs. Yeah, okay, I guess you might have to have a locomotion system, or maybe roll it under the nervous system. I don't know. What do you think? But anyways, yeah, you'd have to be able to determine how a target is damaged and disabled rather than just trying to reduce their hit point pool to 0. That could play well with bounty hunting and having a target possibly worth more alive than dead. And a bounty hunter might want to have a surgeon around to prevent the latter from happening and thus losing out on more crits than they would have otherwise. No matter how CIG eventually does it, I just really hope it's nuanced and not just more powerful beams. If mining is any indicator, mining and refining, I think one of the reasons it's taken so long to roll out the next tier of medical gameplay is that CIG is trying to figure out how to gamify it beyond just laying on a bed and getting beamed. Okay, so here's where you come in. What do you think of this idea? For that matter, on the bigger picture, how do you think CIG will incentivize us to stay put when our bodies are all shut up? Let me know in the down below bits, and thanks for watching. Catch you next time.